As the war in Europe neared its bitter end, German women who had been caught up in the chaos found themselves suddenly prisoners of the Allied forces. Many had been civilians, some working in factories or supporting the war effort in non-combat roles. And yet they were swept up in a system that treated anyone associated with the German state as a potential threat. The fear that gripped them was immediate and intense. They had heard rumors about what happened to prisoners. Harsh treatment, forced labor, and in some cases, even death. Every story, every whispered warning, fed into a growing sense of dread. When they were told they were being taken to the woods, the phrase alone conjured terrifying images. Isolation, rough conditions, and the possibility that they would disappear without a trace. The journey itself amplified their anxiety. Women huddled together, clutching what little they could carry, wondering if they would survive the trip. Their minds raced with the worst-case scenarios. Memories of air raids, the collapse of towns, and the violence of retreating soldiers were fresh in their minds. They were acutely aware that war had not been kind, especially to those on the losing side. The environment of fear was not just about physical safety. It was psychological, a relentless pressure that weighed on them as heavily as any baggage. They didn't know what awaited them, and the uncertainty was almost unbearable. Every sound, every command from the soldiers escorting them, heightened their alarm. Their imaginations painted bleak pictures of captivity, reinforcing the sense that they were powerless and at the mercy of their captors. It wasn't only fear for themselves that haunted them. They worried about their families and communities. Many had left children, elderly relatives, or husbands behind, and the thought that they might never see them again added another layer of despair. In their minds, being taken to the woods meant being removed not just from home, but from everything familiar, from the very life they had known. The phrase itself, so simple, almost casual in tone, was laden with threat and menace. They braced for cruelty because the world they had been taught to expect from the Allies was one of rigid retribution. Years of propaganda and wartime experiences had conditioned them to see the enemy as unyielding, harsh, and unmerciful. Every instinct screamed that this journey would be dangerous and dehumanizing. Yet, amid all this fear, there was also a quiet resilience. Many of the women tried to remain composed, drawing strength from each other and from memories of better times before the war consumed everything. They whispered reassurances, held on to scraps of hope, and silently prayed that the worst might not come to pass. Their terror was real and visceral, but so too was their ability to endure. This fear, the kind that comes from stepping into the unknown, from being completely unmoored in a collapsing world, set the stage for what would come next. It was a fear that seemed justified, that made every glance and gesture fraught with tension. Yet it also made the kindness they would eventually encounter all the more profound, shocking, and life-changing. When the German women finally arrived at the American camps, the fear that had built up over days of uncertainty began to meet a reality they could hardly have imagined. Instead of the brutality they had anticipated, they were met with a level of care and humanity that completely contradicted the warnings in stories they had been told. The Americans provided them with shelter, warm clothing, and nourishing meals. Basic necessities that the women had feared would be withheld. For many, it was the first time in weeks, or even months, that they felt truly safe. The simplest gestures, a soft blanket, a hot meal, a warm smile, carried immense significance. After living through the collapse of their homeland, constant bombardments, and the relentless tension of war, these acts of kindness seemed almost miraculous. The treatment went far beyond physical needs. The American soldiers and camp staff engaged with the women in ways that acknowledged their humanity and dignity. They listened to concerns, offered guidance, and allowed the women to express their fears without judgment. In these moments, the women realized that they were not being punished for being German, and that the people around them were not motivated by vengeance but by genuine empathy. This recognition was transformative. It challenged everything they had been taught about the enemy and reshaped their understanding of what it meant to be captured. Fear slowly began to give way to a tentative sense of relief, and the tension that had gripped them during the journey to the camps started to ease. Many of the women found that the Americans treated them almost like family. Soldiers and staff would take the time to teach practical skills, offer comfort during moments of emotional distress, and even allow the women small freedoms within the confines of the camp. Some were invited to participate in recreational activities, from helping with chores to joining simple games, which gave them a glimpse of normal life after months of war and chaos. These gestures, while small in comparison to the horrors they had endured, had an outsized effect on the women's mental and emotional state. They began to see that even in the aftermath of devastating conflict, kindness could exist, and it could be life-changing. The psychological impact of this treatment was profound. Women who had been trained to fear, distrust, and expect cruelty found themselves confronting a new reality where empathy and respect were the norm. Many later reflected that the experience helped restore their faith in humanity, even as the world around them remained scarred by war. For the first time, they could imagine a life where survival did not come at the cost of dignity, and where their status as enemy nationals did not dictate the level of care they received. This unexpected compassion also played a practical role in maintaining order and morale within the camps. By fostering an environment of respect and care, the Americans encouraged cooperation and minimized resistance. The women were more willing to engage positively, follow routines, and participate in the day-to-day functioning of the camp because they felt valued and safe. In this way, the treatment of the German women POWs became a powerful example of how empathy, patience, and respect can transform not only individual lives but entire situations, even in the aftermath of war. Ultimately, the German women arrived terrified and bracing for the worst, only to discover a reality shaped by compassion, humanity, and care. The Americans showed them that even in the shadow of conflict, small acts of kindness could create profound change, offering hope and reassurance in a world that had seemed overwhelmingly cruel. The experiences of the German women POWs in Minnesota and other American camps did more than provide immediate safety and care. They left a lasting impression that extended far beyond the physical comforts of food, shelter, and clothing. The way the Americans treated them, patiently, respectfully, and with genuine concern, created a psychological impact that challenged everything these women had been taught to believe about the enemy. For years, propaganda had depicted the Allies as ruthless and unforgiving, as people who would exact vengeance on anyone associated with Germany. The women had braced themselves for mistreatment, yet what they encountered was compassion, humanity, and understanding. This contrast was so stark that it forced many to confront deeply ingrained ideas about loyalty, morality, and the nature of human beings. The cultural and psychological ramifications of this treatment were profound. Many of the women realized that they had been living in a world shaped by fear, isolation, and indoctrination. In Germany, they had been told to distrust everyone outside their immediate circle, to see those who were different as enemies, and to accept suffering as a natural consequence of their national identity. In Minnesota, they were shown that care and empathy could cross these boundaries, that the enemy could act with honor, decency, and respect. This revelation was not only liberating but transformative, as it allowed them to reclaim a sense of dignity that had been eroded by years of war and loss. Beyond reshaping personal beliefs, this experience also had lasting implications for post-war reconciliation. Women who returned to Germany or emigrated elsewhere carried with them memories of how Americans had treated them with respect and humanity. These memories became part of a broader narrative that challenged simplistic notions of us versus them, and underscored the possibility of bridging divides created by years of conflict. By experiencing compassion firsthand, these women were able to foster understanding, forgiveness, and empathy in ways that contributed to healing both personally and culturally. The seeds of trust planted in those camps helped to humanize the former enemy and laid the groundwork for a more nuanced understanding of the war and its consequences. The lessons extend beyond history, too. The story of these POWs demonstrates that even in the most extreme circumstances, empathy can profoundly influence behavior, build trust, and restore a sense of humanity. When fear dominates, people brace for cruelty, expecting the worst. But when kindness is extended, even in small ways, it can change perspectives, inspire cooperation, and create lasting emotional and cultural impact. For the German women, acts as simple as listening, feeding, or offering a warm bed became transformative. They were reminders that human beings can choose compassion over cruelty, and that empathy has the power to heal trauma and rebuild shattered worlds. In the end, the German women arrived terrified, anticipating hostility and harsh punishment, yet they discovered a different reality entirely. The Americans' treatment did more than ease immediate fear. It reshaped their understanding of humanity, loyalty, and the possibilities for reconciliation after war. This story stands as a timeless testament to the power of empathy and care, showing that even in the darkest moments of human history, compassion can illuminate a path forward. It reminds us that acts of understanding, however small, have the capacity to transform not only individual lives but also entire communities, leaving legacies that endure long after the war has ended.